Let's go to Johannesburg and speak to the journalist Lukhanyo Calata. Lukhanyo, welcome to the program. If you don't mind, I'd like to start with a personal tragedy for your family, because I know your father was killed during the apartheid regime. What happened?
Good evening, sir. Well, my father was a political activist that lived and worked in the small town of Cradock in the Eastern Cape here in South Africa. And he and three of his comrades were murdered by the apartheid government in 1985 because they had successfully led a revolution in the town that we grew up. And because they had done so, seized power from the apartheid government, the government used their murders, very brutal murders, as an example and as a show of force to the rest of the country to say that if you dare take power, this is what we will do to you. So, and it's been almost 40 years now. And obviously, we are still waiting for answers from the new government of South Africa, led by the ANC.
That Truth and Reconciliation Commission that was supposed to address the situation for many people like you who had suffered personally during apartheid, did that make any difference to many South Africans?
Well, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission was actually very good for people like, well, for families like ours, and particularly for, people like my mother, because for the first time in a democratic South Africa, our parents were able to go and speak for themselves and articulate the horrors that they had suffered under apartheid. The unfortunate thing was that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission had then made several recommendations, which it then handed over to the government in 2003, the government as led, of course, by the African National Congress. Now, it's the ANC that then failed to implement the recommendations that were made by the TRC. I do think that it's wrong for people to blame the TRC. I think the TRC did what it could in the limited time frame and limited resources that it had, but the bulk of the blaming and should be on the African National Congress, because it was the one that held political power and that failed to implement those recommendations.
What are the alternatives to the ANC, Lukhanyo?
I think we would ultimately need a change in legislation in terms of how it is that we vote for the leaders in the country. At the moment in South Africa, we vote for a party. The party then decides who it wants to hold public office. I think what we need is something probably similarly to what we see in the United States of America, when individuals are actually the ones that are vying for those positions, and we can then vote for those individuals themselves, and then we hold the individuals accountable. Because right now, we have to hold a party accountable after the elections. And then the ANC has proven itself on so many occasions that once it is elected into power, it then turns its back on the very same people that elected it into office.
What about the future and the upcoming elections, and your feelings of optimism or pessimism in terms of international financing? South Africa is in a difficult place. Many investors are very wary of putting money into the country.
And that's a terrible thing, and a result of ANC corruption over the last 30 years, where people aren't sure that the money that they put into the country to build the economy, to create the jobs that we so desperately require in this country, that they will actually get their return on investments. It is very difficult to kind of obviously to predict the future, but I do think that because of the strength of the African National Congress, it is likely to be voted back into power. But I think that with a reduced majority, and I do think that this is ultimately the last time that in South Africa we will see a government by the African National Congress on its own. I do think that come 2029, we are likely to sit with a coalition government, and then hopefully from there we'll proceed along those lines.
Lukhanyo, really interesting to hear your thoughts. Thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you very much.